Hi, Roy Williams with Airframe Components, and welcome back to episode 3 of our 1959 Cessna 150 restoration project. So Phil, you had mentioned when you picked up the airplane that the wings were of course removed from the aircraft. They'd been stored underneath.
Totally wrapped in visqueen, which trapped all the moisture, and it was stored underneath the deck of a man's above ground pool. And the corrosion factor is just fantastic because of the chlorine in the air and no ventilation to allow the wings to dry out.
So the assumption is they've probably been stored underneath that deck for the whole time that the aircraft had been dismantled. So we got Phil's wings in and opened them up, and they weren't even worth using as a starting point to build a new set of wings. So we just started with a totally different set of structures. We dismantled the structures completely, cleaned, epoxy primed everything inside, and then put the structures back together, then started using all brand new metal. So once we put the structures all back together, we put the new skin on here. As you can see by the shots here, the airplane hasn't even been polished yet, and you can see how clean the metal is. So getting this polished back to a really nice luster should be a fairly simple job. I say that tongue-in-cheek, polishing an aircraft. Like you said, it's one of the hardest jobs to keep an airplane going.
A lot of labor.
During the process, of course, it takes extra time ensuring that the skins aren't scratched, that the tooling marks aren't visible. Of course, when a wing is painted, those items all get covered up. But when an airplane's polished, every sin and every flaw is exposed. As you can see, the wings are leading edges are covered with paper. So Phil, what we've done here on these wings, just like we did on the fuselage, the whole interior structure has the green epoxy chromate primer inside. The fuel tanks have been redone as well, primered. New fuel sender units in here, new wiring. These will have all new hardware, all new cables as well. So I assume while the wings are off the aircraft is when you'll do the initial cut and polish on these wings. And what would be a time frame do you think would take to polish a wing? Like, each wing, how many hours do you think we'd have into something like that?
I'm guessing I'll have at least 20 hours per wing in polishing, because it's not a one-step process. You've got to start out with, it's called rouge, and the most coarse is fine, but then we keep using a finer paste, and then it'll really shines up nice, and it'll be just like a mirror. And then on the top of the this is the left wing, so on the bottom of this wing we'll have the N number of the airplane, the registration number, and I believe those are 20 or 24 inch letters. And then on the top of the right wing we'll have the number also. The N numbers, when I put those on the two wings, that'll be the only paint on the wings, with the exception of the wing tip, which is a separate fastened on piece, which will be painted the trim color, the vermilion red.
So now the large registration numbers on the bottom of the left wing, top of the right wing, were those required back in '59, or was that an option?
That was a transition period. All airplanes prior to probably 1958 had the large N numbers on the top and bottom of the wings. But then they transitioned to just putting them on usually a vertical surface, and in most cases the tail, in 2-inch numbers. And they did that from about '59 probably up through the early '70s, and then they required the I think they're 10-inch letters on the sides of the fuselage or the vertical fin. So there's been quite a transition in the rules. Started out, they were all NC numbers if they were civilian aircraft. Then they dropped the C, and then it was just the N, up to 4 digits, and then a single alpha character. And then I think it was in the early 70s they started allowing you to have vanity numbers, for lack of a better term, and you could have 1, 2, or 3 numbers and then up to 2 alpha characters. But we're putting this back to the original number, which was November 7926 Echo. And when this airplane was done, Cessna evidently just was allotted a block of numbers. So all of the N numbers and all of the serial numbers progressed. I just talked to a gentleman down in Cincinnati last week. He has a Cessna 150 1959, and it is 70 serial numbers older than mine. And his N number is 70 numbers less. And so they just ran consistently. I don't believe they do that at all anymore.
So does the N number reflect the serial number of the aircraft at all?
No. Unless you were wanted to assign a vanity number that was available. If you want a spatial number on an airplane, you can go on the FAA's website and it'll show what numbers may or may not be available. In this particular case, the point I was making was that they used N numbers that were just numerically in sequence, and the 150s, they didn't use anything out of that sequence on any other models. The 150s, they built 70 of them, and they used the consecutive numbers. They all ended in Echo in 1959.
So how many 150s were produced in 1959?
It's really hard to tell, and the reason is that they had actually been building 150s in 1958, actually early in 1958. They built quite a few, but they never sold them. They were just building the airplanes. It was out of the prototype stage and they were getting them ready to sell, but then everything was titled in 1959 regardless of when it was built. This one was test flown in October of 1959. The airplane that is 70 serial numbers older than this was test flown in October of 59.
So there was quite a few being test flown.
I don't believe the production was quite that high at the time, but according to the records I could get from Cessna, that when they decided to go to market in 1959, they took every airplane they had on the shelf, which went back over maybe a year and a half's production, and titled them all 59s.
So we've got both left-hand and right-hand wings completed. We have the ailerons, the flaps all completed. We'll be turning our attention to finishing up the fuselage and then finishing up all the empennage items as well. Stay tuned for future episodes of the 1959 Cessna 150 project and our interviews here with Phil Allison, owner of the aircraft, as we progress throughout the next year as we get this aircraft underway.